Business Now is brought to you by the Information Technology Association of America, business development, networking, and public policy leadership for today's IT industry, and in part by the global consulting firm Booz Allen Hamilton, integrating the full range of consulting capabilities to help clients solve their toughest problems. Booz Allen is committed to delivering results that endure. Information and employment opportunities at boozallen.com. And by Bearing Point, 17,000 management and technology consultants to help public and private sector organizations around the world get things done differently. Learn how at bearingpoint.com/results. And in cooperation with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, PBS, and Maryland Public Television.
Welcome to Business Now Capital Edition. I'm Gary Nuremberg with another report on how private industry is solving problems for government at every level and at the same time powering economic growth in the greater Washington-Baltimore area. We've watched the region grow steadily over the last few decades as governments incrementally increased their IT spending, but that was supercharged after the painful lessons of 9/11. And the greater Washington-Baltimore region now has more programmers, engineers, and software developers than any other metro area in the United States. 9/11 was an IT 2x4 slamming us in the face. As we watched those first responders climb into the burning towers, we realized in horror they couldn't talk to each other, couldn't talk to other agencies well enough to stay alive. Even laymen began to understand the word interoperability and how key it is in a world with too many terrorists who want to do too much harm. So we spent billions, started to feel good about ourselves, and had our complacency washed away when Katrina showed us again that we just can't communicate as well as we should when a natural disaster strikes. Okay, you got it. Better communication is key, but that's not all you need to know, as we hear in today's Tech Talk Roundtable on interoperability. Our moderator is Phil Bond, President and CEO of the Information Technology Association of America.
At Ground Zero on September 11, 2001, and along America's Gulf Coast in the days following Hurricane Katrina, we were reminded of just how important it can be for police officers, rescuers, and other first responders to be able to communicate over technologies as basic as a handheld radio. Federal, state, and local government agencies are working to make that happen. In the meantime, many more questions have arisen about how we can incorporate use of mobile phones, computers, and other devices into our response to the next natural disaster or, heaven forbid, terrorist attack. What progress have we already made? How long will we have to wait before voice and data flow seamlessly from police officer to firefighter or witness to the next tragedy? Joining us to take on this topic are Dr. David Boyd, Director, Command, Control, and Interoperability at the Department of Homeland Security; Michael Thurk, Chief Operating Officer of Avaya; Paige Atkins, Director of the Defense Spectrum Organization at the Defense Information Systems Agency; and Chris Dorobek, Editor-in-Chief, Federal Computer Week. Welcome to all of you. Look forward to a conversation about the importance of interoperability. And Michael Thurk, give us a quick layman's definition. What are we talking about?
Well, interoperability is something when you, for anyone who walks the streets knows there's a multiplicity of devices that are available today, from phones to radios to TV, broadcasting, a wide variety of mechanisms by which we communicate. Interoperability really, if you just took it at its very basic level, imagine two people, we both communicate with each other, but you speak French and I speak English. It's not going to work out very well. Well, a lot of these systems have the same problems. They need to have a standard or a framework on which the two of us can communicate.
Help me frame the discussion here for our viewers just a little bit. Take the case of a natural disaster. People deploy, state, local, federal. When does interoperability come into play and how does it come into play? Paige, from the DoD point of view, what do you see?
Interoperability comes into play as soon as you hit the ground. I mean, the precious moments, the first 24 or 48 hours are extremely critical. And being able to coordinate, communicate, and really structure the response is critically important to the success of that response. So it's as soon as you hit the ground, and even precursor to that in terms of ensuring that you're prepared from a planning perspective to go in to hit the ground running.
Because when you get to this site, Dr. Boyd, you want your wired devices talking to your wireless devices, different kinds of wireless devices talking to each other. This sounds incredibly technically difficult.
Interestingly, technically, it's not as difficult as it sounds. And in fact, I'd argue that interoperability starts in the planning stage as you're getting ready for the event and as you have players beginning to exchange information and talk to each other. Most of the problems in establishing interoperability aren't technology-based. They're people and process-based. We have an agreement up front that we're going to be able to work together. The technology, for the most part, exists. Sometimes it requires some planning, sometimes it requires a little bit of an investment, but what it requires most of all is a willingness on the part of the players to allow these things to be connected, and that means they have to believe that they really need to work together to exchange this information.
And then being able to scratch out a plan together to get...
Yeah, planning is absolutely essential, and the plan needs to be in place before the event, not afterwards.
Recently, we had the opportunity to talk to Benny Thompson, chairman of the Homeland Security Committee in the House, and he touched on a similar theme. Let's take a listen to his comments, and we'll come back to the conversation.
Big challenge, big challenge. You know, the public rightfully assumes that first responders and everyone who's coming to help coming and talking to each other in the process. You and I and many people listening to this program know that that's not the case. And so we're having a real challenge in this country, bringing the capacity for those individuals who are offering help to be able to communicate in real time. Some of it's spectrum allocation, some of it's equipment and technology, but we have to interface it so it works. We now have on the drawing board technologies that would allow those things to happen.
One of the words that always concerns me a little bit is plan, especially when you speak from industry standpoint and look at government planning. Sometimes government planning seems to go on for a very, very long period of time. And so, you know, I think about the internet, for example, and I've often commented internally that if we had planned the internet, it probably would never have happened. Because it really was a combination of events.
We have a tendency, especially in Washington, to think government means the federal government.
Fair enough.
The reality is a government starts at a much lower level than that. And in emergencies, in any natural disaster, the local officials are going to be the first people on the spot. It's going to be the local fire, it's going to be local police, it's going to be local emergency medical. If what you're going to build, if your interoperability solutions, whether they're data or the land mobile radio or they're using old analog equipment or the rest, meets the needs of the local guy first, then he's willing to be a part of it, and he's willing to be a part of that plan. For one thing, the local guys own, operate, and maintain more than 90% of the public safety wireless infrastructure in the United States.
So there is a balance between planning and execution. And if you look 10 years ago, we could have never predicted what we're seeing in theater today from a military standpoint. We could have never planned for that. And I think one of the keys here, particularly as we look at public safety concerns, is to provide the right flexibility and adaptability, whether that be in our process or technology, to allow us to adapt as unpredictable circumstances present themselves.
You look at Virginia Tech, the horrible situation that happened in Virginia Tech, but students weren't waiting to be told information. They were sharing it amongst themselves over Facebook or MySpace or all these ways that, and they are sharing information. So I think it's something that's, as these born digital generation move forward, they're going to force this to happen. You see a lot of frustration in agencies of people who say, hold on, I can do this at home, why can't I do it at work?
That is a huge undertaking to say we're going to take 21st century digital thinking and marry it to a planning process that goes from the grassroots all the way up.
Not only that, you've got to remember that the installed infrastructure is gigantic. Our best estimate is that the wireless infrastructure alone, just the LMR infrastructure, land mobile radio, probably exceeds $100 billion. And it's not federal money, it's not even state money, it's local money. And so assuming that we're going to change all those systems out so that we can make them digital capable to meet today, I think is a bit of a stretch. We're going to have to think about exactly what communication do we need, where do we need it, how do we tie it together. And what happens over time is you begin to find those points of intersection and you begin to let systems communicate.
Is there any roadmap for you out there?
Virginia was a model. It came in and said, can you help us figure out how to build a bottom-up statewide plan? And in some respects, they've become a bit of a poster boy for interoperability at the statewide across the United States.
To your point, exactly, state and local, we've seen actions taken in Galveston, Texas, for example, where we put in mobile communications for a contact center in the case of mobile E911, so that if in fact one of their centers was going to be under a potential hurricane situation, that could be remoted very, very quickly. A similar situation in Miami. So you can start to see some of the local, state and local governments taking proactive actions.
As a retired soldier, my view is that the plan isn't what it's all about. I agree with George Marshall and some others who said that it isn't the plan that matters, it's planning that's crucial.
Very good. And when you think about your planning process, what's the biggest challenge you see on your radar screen right now?
I think unequivocally throughout all of the planning process, whether it's at the federal level, state level, or local level, is governance. There's nothing more difficult, there's nothing more complicated than governance, and that is, how do we agree that we're going to cooperate to make these things happen? How do we agree? Because governance implicates who's in charge, who's going to pay for it, who's going to control this thing, and those are all the issues that I think trigger the strongest emotions.
And if that hurdle were cleared, is there a technological advance and more interoperability waiting to happen?
The digital world's not a silver bullet. It doesn't solve everything. You buy new problems with digital. But the reality is that as we become more and more digital, a lot of these problems become easier and easier to solve. The issue, though, is that we have a huge infrastructure, like the early days of the highway system. There are a lot of gravel roads out there, and they're not going to be replaced overnight because it costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of time to do that. And there are issues involving spectrum, there are issues involving equipment, there's the kind of technology you're going to put in place. And the other challenge is a positive kind of challenge, and that is we're in the business of innovation in the United States. That's what's made us so effective, it's what made us so good. So we're not going to be able to lock things down to say this is what you're going to build and this is how it's going to plug together. We could do that, but I don't believe we would ever want to do that because there's a great risk that we would stifle innovation.
One of the things we talk a lot about today in industry is unified communications, and really it's a euphemism to a large extent for bringing what we call multimodal communications together. Voice, data, video, all of those medium now are being presented, for example, on a desktop or a call center when E911 comes in. You start to have not just the caller, not just the caller information, not just voice, but you have voice, data, perhaps a video feed from a cell phone coming in directly from the particular site providing additional information. Unifying that communications is really at the forefront right now of what our industry is working on.
You get the planning done, you get your local folks contributing their particular insight, you get the standards in place. Does it start to look like Jack Bauer on 24? You show up and you've got what kinds of information do the first responders have? Where are they pulling it from? What does the future look like?
Well, I think within the limitations that are appropriately in place because of privacy legislation and the Constitution, we would like to get to the Jack Bauer kind of thing. But think about it in a more mundane way. A fire department arriving at a major disaster would like to be able to get a clear map of where things are. On 911 in 2001, one of the first challenges was where were the buildings?
Any other thoughts on what it looks like when you look down the road?
You know, I guess we'd all like to see or be Jack Bauer, I suppose. But I think as you look out, I'd really like to see this very, very high on the national agenda. This is something that can be solved. We can have consistent communications across the country. We can respond better to disasters. And it just seems to me that on the national agenda, from both funding standpoint, from a framework and standards standpoint, that industry is very much ready to act and has acted. And in fact, as I recall, in Katrina, there were a number of companies that came together immediately after.
Do you have sense of frustration?
I have a high degree of sense of frustration because I know it's possible. I know it can happen, and to the point is, it's not a technology issue today. It's very much a policy and a will.
What you need first is interoperable communications, because if you don't have effective communications, you don't have command and control. If you don't have command and control, then you can't coordinate the rescue operation. You can't coordinate the support it takes to pull us out of the disaster. The Jack Bauer thing sometimes suggests that there are things already there and already possible that aren't, which then causes people not to provide the kind of support locally. You can't ask a local agency or a local mayor to take a risk on a technology that may not be proven because he's concerned about life and death. He's concerned about protecting his community.
We feel actually we're being pulled into situations, primarily target areas, the Florida coast, Texas coast, the Washington, D.C., places where there's a high degree of sensitivity around the topic. And a lot of times what you can go in with new technologies, not only provide a better solution, but oftentimes you can provide it at lower cost.
There's a lot more interoperability out there than sometimes folks recognize. When we conducted the baseline survey, completed several months ago, we looked at some 22 or 25,000 different agencies across the United States. 2/3 of the agencies who responded reported that they were able to achieve interoperability for at least scheduled events, which means the technical capability was there. What tended not to be there were the things that come from planning. The advance agreements, the standard operating procedures, and those sorts of things. And the reality is that the best emergency management systems, even though we've developed some in the federal government and we like to brag about, are nowhere near what the commercial guys are going to do as they take that profit incentive, which is a really powerful way to encourage people to make useful things happen. And so the best platforms out there are commercial platforms.
If you build it, they will come. If you build a better mousetrap, people do buy into that.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that there's no silver bullet. We've talked about many different facets of this problem, and we have to address all of them really to get to our end state.
I think there is certainly a heightened awareness. The fact that we're doing a program like this is certainly helpful. But I also think that we just need to move faster. Just need to move faster.
What do you look for from Congress right now?
If the Congress views this as a priority, the investment will be made, the industry will follow, and we will move quickly.
The point that I would make that I think is most important of all is that they need to be consistent. That you can't just pass something today and expect that that's it. That fixes it and it'll be fixed forever. This is a problem that's going to be with us for some time.
I would also say to ensure that folks understand the complexity and that they don't get overzealous on a certain quote-unquote solution like the 700 megahertz auction. That's not going to fix it all. So don't think that that's what they have to do and they're done.
Because at the end of the day, the federal money is not a lot. A really robust communication system for a really large metropolis, say like in Ithaca, New York, is going to cost from $20 to $50 million. New York City alone in Long Island is putting in something like $1.5 billion to build that infrastructure. So we have to understand that they have to be part of it because they're ultimately going to pick up the largest share of the cost. So our federal money winds up being wasted if we don't build it in a way, if we don't provide it in a way that builds on what on meeting their emergency needs and their requirements.
But your presence here and discussion here, I think, have helped to make the point that we need to move it up on the priority list and make sure this is in front of our legislative and executive leaders on a regular basis. I want to thank all of you for being part of the conversation, fascinating conversation on interoperability and the possibilities of securing not only our country but our economy as well, as was mentioned. And thank you for watching too. Join us next time on Tech Talk.